Picture the most famous explosion in movie history, the Death Star. That giant orange fireball, that deep, chest-rattling boom rolling out across the galaxy. Here's the problem. If you'd been floating right next to it, you would have heard nothing. Absolutely nothing. No rumble, no crackle, not even a whisper. For almost 50 years, Hollywood has been selling you a gorgeous lie. And the truth behind that lie is stranger, scarier, and honestly more beautiful than anything George Lucas ever put on screen. Because space isn't just quiet. Space is the most complete silence that exists anywhere in reality. And that silence isn't a bug in the universe. It's built into how reality works. Let me show you why. First, we have to talk about what sound actually is, because most of us picture it wrong. Sound isn't a thing that travels on its own. Sound is a disturbance. When you talk, your vocal cords shove the air molecules in front of your mouth. Those molecules bump the ones next to them, which bump the next ones, and so on, like a stadium wave made of pressure. That chain reaction rolls all the way to my eardrum, and my brain turns it back into your voice. The key word there is chain. Sound needs a crowd. It needs stuff to push against. On Earth, that stuff is air, and it's packed tight. At sea level, 1 cubic centimeter of air, a space about the size of a sugar cube, holds roughly 27 quintillion molecules. That's a 27 with 18 zeros after it. It's so crammed that a sound wave can sprint through it at about 767 miles an hour. Now, let's go to space. Out in interstellar space, that same sugar cube volume doesn't hold 27 quintillion particles. On average, it holds about one lonely atom, usually hydrogen, drifting in the dark. Sit with what that means. For sound to travel, particles have to collide and hand the energy off. But out there, the particles are so far apart they almost never touch. There's no crowd to do the wave. No chain reaction. A pressure wave your ear could actually hear has nothing to move through, so it simply never forms. That's why space is silent. Not empty in some poetic way, but silent because of cold, hard physics. No medium, no sound, period. Which brings us back to Hollywood, and to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. George Lucas was never confused about the science. In interviews and behind-the-scenes footage, he's admitted it flat out. In a theater, he said, he needed emotion and entertainment, not strict physics. Make that Death Star explosion truly silent, and the drama, the epic scale, all of it just evaporates. And he's right. A silent explosion doesn't sell popcorn. So the TIE fighters scream, the lasers pew, the explosions roar, and we all happily play along. But here's what I love. Not every director took the easy way out. A few looked at that silence and thought, what if we use it? Go back to 1968. Stanley Kubrick makes 2001, A Space Odyssey, and does something almost nobody had dared. When an astronaut steps outside the ship, there's no music, no rumble, no drama. All you hear is his own breathing inside the suit. Heavy, lonely, trapped, outside, dead silence. Then Kubrick pairs that void with a waltz, the Blue Danube, and turns the emptiness of space into something cold, graceful, unforgettable. Then Christopher Nolan with Interstellar. Nolan is obsessive about physics, almost to a fault. Watch the Endurance swing past Saturn's rings. Or the moment everything goes catastrophically wrong at the station. Anytime the camera cuts to the outside of the ship, the soundtrack drops out. No explosions, no screaming metal. Just Hans Zimmer's organ swelling up to carry all the emotion the silence leaves behind. And gravity pulls off maybe the smartest trick of all. When debris rips through the station, the outside shots are completely mute, exactly as they should be. But when the camera pushes in close to the astronaut, you start to feel the impacts. Low, dull thuds. Why? Because the vibrations travel through the solid metal of the station, into the air inside her suit, and finally into her ear. That's not a mistake. That's the director quietly teaching you real physics. Sound can't cross a vacuum, but it can crawl through solid matter. Notice the pattern. The directors who actually understood the science didn't try to recreate the vacuum. They did something smarter. They weaponized the silence. Because the scariest thing about space was never the monster or the explosion. It's the quiet. Back in 1979, Ridley Scott put 7 words on the poster for Alien, and they might be the most perfect science fiction tagline ever written. In space, no one can hear you scream. That's not a threat. That's just physics. And it's terrifying. So at this point you'd think the story's over. Space is silent, the end. But this is where it gets weird. Because space isn't always silent. And when it does make a sound, it will stop you cold. In May of 2022, NASA released an audio clip that broke the internet. The sound of a black hole. Not a sound effect, not a simulation. The actual pressure waves coming off a supermassive black hole at the center of the Perseus galaxy cluster. Here's how that's even possible. Remember the rule, no medium, no sound. Well, that black hole isn't sitting in empty space. It's surrounded by a huge, dense cloud of gas and hot plasma filling the cluster. And that gas is a medium. So when the black hole belches out pressure waves, those waves actually travel, as real sound, through the gas around it. Astronomers measured the pitch, and it is deep. Impossibly deep. The note this black hole is holding sits 57 octaves below middle C. It's a B-flat, but a B-flat so low its frequency is more than 1 billion times lower than the lowest sound a human ear can pick up. You could never hear it, not in 1,000 lifetimes. And think about what that tells you. Our ears, the thing we use to make sense of the whole world, are basically deaf to the scale the universe actually plays at. So to let us hear it at all, NASA raised the pitch, shifting it up by 57 and 58 octaves. What comes out is this low, groaning, spine-chilling growl. It sounds like the universe itself is exhausted, like something ancient waking up in the dark. And it's real! That's not the only voice out there, either. In 2012, the Voyager 1 spacecraft finally crossed out of our solar system into interstellar space. On board was an instrument that measures plasma waves. When a burst of energy from the sun slammed into the thin gas out there, it made the plasma oscillate, and those oscillations happened to land right inside the range of human hearing. NASA converted them straight into audio, and you get this eerie, rising hiss and whistle. The sound of the space between the stars, recorded from farther away than any human object has ever traveled. There's even a whole science to this now. NASA's data sonification project takes light the telescopes capture, X-rays, infrared, visible light, and translates it into sound. Brighter regions get louder. Higher positions get higher notes. They've done it for the center of our galaxy and for the pillars of creation. They've done it for the center of our galaxy and for the pillars of creation. To be clear, that's not sound that exists out in space. It's a translation, a way of using your ears to see the universe. Science as art. Now here's the part that really gets me. The reversal. Out there, floating in the vacuum, you get the most total silence imaginable. But step inside the International Space Station, humanity's one little bubble of life in all that emptiness, and it is loud, constantly. The fans, the water pumps, the carbon dioxide scrubbers, the life support, all of it runs 24 hours a day and never shuts up. In the crew's living areas, the noise usually sits between 55 and 65 decibels. In some of the equipment-packed modules, it's been measured as high as 72 to 78. Astronauts often have to wear earplugs or noise-canceling headphones because otherwise the constant roar wrecks their sleep and can permanently damage their hearing. Sit with that image for a second. On the outside, perfect, infinite, eternal silence. On the inside, separated by a few inches of metal, the relentless mechanical hum of the machines keeping you alive. That thin wall is the entire difference between life and the void. So let's go back to where we started. Space is silent, but now you know it isn't broken, and it isn't empty the way the movies pretend. The silence is a direct consequence of how thinly the universe spreads itself out, and it's the exact same emptiness that lets black holes sing their impossible low notes into clouds of gas, that lets Voyager whistle back to us from the dark. The silence is what makes the sound so precious when it finally comes. Hollywood filled that silence with noise, because they were scared of it. But the quiet is the point. It's what makes space feel infinite. It's what makes us feel small. And it's what makes that single groaning note from a black hole, 57 octaves down, feel less like data and more like the universe finally deciding to speak. In space, no one can hear you scream. But if you listen closely, in just the right places, space is screaming back.